Hello again.
When you think PC chips, you think most known for cheap motherboards and fake cache chips, and for being unscrupulous and sneaky, but they got away with it. Today they are the elite group computer systems, ECS, and those of us, the suckers that bought their old hardware, have developed a flat spot on our foreheads while we unrelentingly try to get these systems to work again. But today I have a success story to share with you all. After 5 years of digging and searching endless web pages, watching countless videos, trying to get to the bottom of this, and even recently buying a second PcChips board, in this video I'm going to share with you the good, the bad, and the ugly of PcChips. A lone gunman versus two ornery motherboards. An epic battle of confusion, frustration, abandonment, but ultimately hope. Thanks to a sharp eye, a steady hand, and a quick draw. Welcome to part 2 of Escape to PcChips.
Go ahead.
Okay, here I go. As I mentioned in part 1, my journey began about 5 years ago when I purchased 3 computers from a very reasonable seller about an hour away from me. Back then, I was tirelessly searching for a Sound Blaster Pro 2.0 for a couple of years. I had just about given up. I had a bunch of P4 stuff given to me by my brother and ran DOSBox with Sound Blaster emulation to hear the Monkey Island theme and the Kyrandium music, which I loved. And I bought a kit from the Netherlands with the Opal 2 chip and had just begun getting refamiliarized with the Opal chip sounds. But I still crave that nostalgic feeling of firing up a 386 and playing the Sound Blaster Pro demo. One day, out of the blue, I found an ad selling a 286 with a CRT and a Sound Blaster card. I asked him what kind of card, but I was prepared for nothing special, due to dozens of disappointments I had in my search up to that point. To my shock and delight, he replied, Sound Blaster Pro 2.0, and my heart nearly stopped. When I asked him if he would sell the card separately, he gave me a very direct no. And the price for all that stuff was well beyond what I was willing to pay. I had never used 286s, so I had no interest in owning one now, and I hate CRT monitors. Much like hard drives, I'm very happy to replace them with newer technology. But thinking I may never see a CT1600 again, I offered him half the price just for the card, and he promptly changed his mind. He mentioned that he had other retro machines that he was selling for crazy cheap, and I made like the wind, and an hour later, I was at his front door. He was in an older home, and I made my way deep into the basement, avoiding bashing my head going down the stairs to find a room packed with ancient computer gear. It was jaw-dropping. He explained to me that a computer shop in town was closing for good, and he got out as much as he could fit in that small room, it looked like. There was a tabletop with hundreds of hard drives, computer cases lining the walls, and boxes of stuff. He had a Pentium 3 setup with a CRT monitor, one of many monitors in the room, and he was prepared to demonstrate the Sound Blaster working for me. I heard it working. He began removing the card from the machine, and I started asking about buying one of many systems he had available. Had I been there only days earlier, I would have come home with half a dozen. As he explained, someone bought a huge quantity before me, and there were only a few left. the P3, a P1, and a questionable 486. Questionable because he was unable to get it to work correctly, but he did impress upon me. It was special because it had VLB slots, and I had no idea what he was talking about, but it sounded cool anyway. At that point, I was mostly interested in having a good machine with ISA slots, so I decided on the P3. It was a Dell, and it looked in great condition. With my newly acquired Sound Blaster Pro card and my P3 computer, I made my way back home to begin my reintroduction to retro computing. The Pentium 3 was whisper quiet, and the PS2 gear my brother gave me connected as expected. I installed the Sound Blaster card and began testing. With his install of Win98, it worked just like in his basement, all was good. But I wanted to hear the Sound Blaster Pro demo. That was crucial. Somewhere around 2016, I started searching on YouTube for that demo. I found a few different versions, and it brought back so many memories. Back to 1993, when I found the cheapest deal on an OEM version of the Sound Blaster Pro card, sold in a brown cardboard box. The excitement I felt with that crazy machine, it was a 386, the potential it had, so many late nights spent delighting in the endless questions I had, and the roller coaster of success and failure. But when that machine began playing the Sugar Plum Fairies music with that gritty synth sound, I was hooked. So that's what I needed to hear. I installed another hard drive, installed DOS 6.22, I tracked down a copy of the Sound Blaster install discs, and when I finally hit the return key to start the Sound Blaster demo, I was sadly alarmed with a series of screeches and peculiar sounds. The demo would not run correctly. It was awful. After all that searching, was the only card I could find defective? Fast forward to days later after I read in various forums, the demo only runs correctly with a 386 or 486 machine. So I decided to return the Pentium 3 in hopes of swapping it for something older, maybe that 486. He mentioned that it had an ISA sound card and said, good luck with that. And for the Pentium 1, he kindly gave me a DIN to PS2 adapter and threw in a serial mouse. Both items I had since forgotten were necessary for an AT-style machine. The Pentium 1 gave me the exact same results. The Sound Blaster Pro demo sounded terrible. And the questionable 486 would not go past post. I had little understanding of these machines at that point, and that was the only 486 he had left, and I was really hoping it would work for me, but it was a dead end. To my surprise, the sound card in the 486 had an Opal 3 chip, but it took me a while to realize why he said good luck. I did get more familiar with the Pentium 1. I had no idea at the time what an MMX 233 chip was, and this machine had one. A few more days passed, and I was thinking about that P3. How quiet it was, how fast it was, and how cheap it was. So I called him again. With fingers crossed, I asked if he still had it, and would he part with it. Yes, it was still available. But he had dropped it while moving some stuff around in that cramped little room, and wasn't 100% sure if it was okay. I sped down and made my way to his retro basement, which I really enjoyed visiting. He dug out a Sound Blaster CD-ROM cable, and we examined the P3, and everything was fine. I told him about my struggles to still hear the Sound Blaster demo, and my plans to find a MIDI cable to write music with the Sound Blaster, and how I wished I still had a 386. He turned around, dug into a bin with dozens of boards, and he said, "Give this a go." He handed me what at the time seemed like the tiniest motherboard I'd ever seen. He said, you're going to need a video card and a controller card. And out of a pile of cards, he gave me free of charge a Trident video card and a controller card. I was in heaven. That was the last time I was there. As I was leaving, his mother expressed how happy she was to see more of the stuff leaving the basement, and I got the impression he needed to get rid of a lot more. I still kind of wonder what is lurking in that basement. Thus begins the story of the M915i. I pulled the board out of the case and tried it on my desk. What I know now would have saved me so much frustration. There was one bad cache chip, but I had no idea. I didn't even know that could stop the machine from booting. And it wouldn't have occurred to me to turn off the cache in the BIOS. That was way over my head. I found that sometimes it wouldn't even start until I moved the keyboard connector. Then in one of many flailing attempts, I decided to pull the CPU and reseat it. The chip was epoxied to the cooling fan, and I made the fatal mistake of assuming I knew which way it went back in. Wrong. I put it in the wrong way. And it stopped working intermittently. It wouldn't do anything. Do you know that sick, horrible feeling of ruining decades-old electronic equipment, stuff that you have no idea if you could replace, let alone the expense to replace it? Well, that's what I was beginning to feel. My only hope was that my new friend with the retro basement would have a box of spare CPUs. But no, he had nothing. I hadn't started buying anything from eBay back then, and I was relying on local sales through an app, and nothing was available until months later. So in the meantime, I decided to dabble with the 386 board. There was corrosion on the power connector, and I repaired a few broken traces around the battery. I had little hope that it would ever work. But one day after many, it finally posted. I had somehow revived that board 100%. At least I thought I had. I put the board in a case, put all the cards in the slots, carefully slid in the Sound Blaster Pro, fired up the machine, and after almost 30 years, I finally heard the Sound Blaster Pro 2.0 demo working perfectly. I played it again and again and again, and to this day I still run it occasionally. I did find the 386 to be quite a bit slower than I remembered, but I was thinking, hell, it's been 30 years, maybe they were that slow. But no, I was running it in slow mode. I had no idea that I needed to add a jumper to boost the speed. After I figured that out, suddenly the machine ran as smooth as I recalled. What a relief. But then, while trying to reinstall DOS, I found that it wouldn't boot from a floppy disk. And only when it was running at turbo speed, the Sound Blaster demo would crash. It took me a while to realize turbo mode was causing the demo to fail. I assumed everything else first. That board still needs repair, so it was a bit disappointing. That made me turn my attention back to the 486 board. And to my amazement, somebody had just coincidentally posted an ad for 486 CPUs. So another hour-long drive to buy an untested DX33 chip, just like the one I fried. Home again, I now had a much better understanding of 486 CPU orientation and correctly placed it in the socket. But the machine would not start. Nothing happened. Days passed. I moved the keyboard connection in such a way the machine suddenly posted. I resoldered it, and the machine began to fire up most of the time. Occasionally it would take a few clicks, but it was almost regular. I think the loose connections had only just started to become an issue at that point. I put the motherboard in a case and began enjoying how much faster it was compared to the 386, as well as rocking the Sound Blaster demo. But once in a while, it would not start up unless I pulled the cards out, pulled the cash, put it back together one by one. Then days later, the same thing. Then tragedy struck. My floppy drive died. I only had 2 or 3 at that point, and they were stupid expensive and hard to find. And then it did it again. I can't say for sure that it was the 486 that did it, because these were old parts and they do just fail. I could have coincidentally had 2 drives die one after another. But the way that 486 was acting, I decided to retire it. I began looking for another 486, inspired by the wood grain 486. I really wanted a good one. I started my obsession with eBay, and I did find a good one. But every once in a while, I would pull out the M915i just to see if I had learned anything more and would be able to outsmart it this time. But no. More issues with startup. I noticed at one point, when I pushed down on the BIOS chip to be sure it was seated right, the machine would fire up. And then it wouldn't. So I assumed there must be a bad connection somewhere. But when I examined the board with the magnifying lens I was using, that was no help. I got the gear to flash a BIOS chip, but that made no difference. Still, pressing on the board gave me results sometimes. Then I gave up and I hung it on the wall to remind me of my mistakes, to not make them again. I was convinced something inside the board was broken and I would just have to accept that I can't fix the problem. But that is maddening. I was watching success after success on YouTube of clever people figuring out these problems, and I wanted that feeling. The expression is closure. To conquer this obstacle, to climb the mountain, to bring it to an end. There are people in this world that love fixing things. Whether it be something you use every day or something that is obsolete and forgotten. The process of learning and logically applying your skills to repair something is like solving a puzzle. It's like an adventure game in a way. So that is the end of the story, and here is what I figured out.